And joining us over Zoom now is Commissioner of the IHSA, Mr. Bobby Cox. First of all, I want to thank you for joining us today and to talk about what the future of high school sports will look like in Indiana, because I'm sure you guys at the IHSA have a lot on your plate right now.
Well, I'm happy to join you all, and you're right. There's, this is uncharted water, as everybody has mentioned before. There's no playbook to deal with the challenges that we're dealing with. This is an unprecedented chain of events for our generation, and subsequently, you have to approach your business and your work a little differently, and this is a great example of the fact that we're doing business a little differently now, and then while we're dealing with this pandemic, and while we're trying to make sure that our student athletes, our coaches, our officials, our school folks are safe and healthy, as well as our staff here, we continue to do business, and we continue to perform the functions of the association, and optimistically prepare for a fall sports season starting in August.
Alrighty, and speaking of fall sports, this situation changes rapidly every day, and we know your answer right now won't be concrete what's going to happen, but as of right now, are you optimistic about fall sports?
I am optimistic. I've been following the return to what the governor of the state of Indiana has been putting out, and the stages that we have created to return to the workplace and to return to school, return to some sense of normalcy in our society. I'm encouraged right now. I've said to a lot of different media outlets over the last 2 months that for us to have a triumphant return to fall sports, we have to have a better summer. And that means what we do in the next 60 to 90 days is critical. We have to continue to follow the guidelines that our professionals have put out there before us, the Department of Health, our governor, Department of Education. And if we can do those things and continue to flatten this curve and not see a spike in the death rate of this virus, and we see progression toward medical treatments, a vaccine hopefully someday, that maybe we can return to fall sports. Now, what that looks like right now, I don't think anybody really knows. Will that be just competitions with no fans? Will that be competitions with limited fans? Will that be competitions with full complement of fans? I don't think anybody knows. And then what kind of PPE will we be supplying to our student athletes, and what will be required and what will be optional? I don't think anybody's really figured any of that out yet. But as we continue to learn more about this virus and continue to study the statistics that are available to us, and the guidance that we're being offered by our governor and by our Department of Health, we'll continue to make decisions on behalf of our student athletes and our member schools.
Yeah, and one of the things you guys are doing over the summer is you're waiving the moratorium week that typically comes around the 4th of July. What was the process of waiving that? Why did you decide to do that?
Well, we had some conversation with our board of directors. As you know, in our bylaws, we have a week that includes the Monday through Sunday that includes the 4th of July. That is a moratorium week. And basically what that means is it's an opportunity for student athletes to be free of obligations at their school for a week. What I like to call a guilt-free week away from practices and competitions and whatever the coach wants you to do. And, many families rely on that, and they take time to go on vacation, and it's just a week to get away from it. Well, this has been a different year. We've been away from each other now since the 1st of March. And I think student athletes and their families, I know our coaches and our school administrators are anxious to get back with students. So the order to close schools was clarified by Dr. McCormick, who's the state superintendent of public instruction. And that date was established as June 30th. Well, July 1st is the very next day, and that falls right in the middle of our moratorium week this year. So as our board started discussing returning to some kind of activity, looking at the calendar and what kind of opportunities might be available based on the staging provided by the governor, we decided to waive the moratorium and allow for schools, if they locally choose to do so, to come back together. I think it's important to note that while the IHSAA has allowed schools to get together during that week of moratorium and beyond until we start fall practices, our member schools always have the authority to install and insist upon regulations that might exceed ours. And we have that in a lot of areas. For example, in our academic rule, our rule is that you got to pass 70% of the classes in a grading period and be enrolled in 70% to stay eligible. We have a lot of schools in our state that exceed that. They might have a no pass, no play policy. They might have a 2.0 grade point policy. Those rules exceed what we provide, and we support those. And we tell our membership that we would support that. This is no different. If a local school board decides they're not ready on July 1st to allow students back on campus, and they decide that, well, it's going to be July 15th because we're going to fumigate our building, we're going to sanitize our building, we're going to sanitize our equipment, we're going to temperature check every person that comes into that building, then we're going to support that. So it's really a minimum guideline at this point in time. The opportunity to get together starting July 1st and get rid of the moratorium week is a unique scenario. I don't anticipate the moratorium week ever going away, but given the fact that we've been apart from each other for so long, that I think it's probably a good move the board made.
Going into kind of what you were saying with fall seasons, if we don't go back to school when we are supposed to be scheduled to go back to school, will fall seasons go into the winter, or will they just be canceled in general like spring seasons?
Well, I think it's a little too early to tell, Katie. I think that that will be a conversation. You know, there's so many moving pieces to that. And there's been a lot of suggestions, but you get to the end of the season and you work backward. So let's take the sport of football. You know, we historically play our football championships in Lucas Oil Stadium on the Friday and Saturday following Thanksgiving. And the stadium is always open on Friday and Saturday for the IHSAA. The Colts don't play on Saturday or Friday. They've played on Thanksgiving Day before, right before our tournament. In many years, they play on Sunday. But that Friday and Saturday belongs to the association. So if you move that, now you get into all kinds of issues. There might be some other event that's in the stadium. So then do you take your state finals and move them out of Lucas Oil Stadium, and where do you go? You know, our fan base has been used to playing indoors in the state championship in football since 1985. So now you're going to make them go outside and, okay, we'll go to Purdue University and play at Ross-Ade Stadium, or we'll go to Memorial Stadium in Bloomington and play outdoors. That's a huge departure from where we're at. And when are you going to do that? And what kind of conflicts do you run in with the university schedule? So anything's on the table, but it creates a lot of other challenges that if you start moving dates and modifying your seasons, it creates a whole nother set of challenges. And right now we're planning on a full fall season, beginning with practices on Monday of week 5, which is the first week of August. 2 weeks after that, all of our sports will begin, and that Friday football will begin. And we're hopeful to have a full complement of fall sports and go into our tournament series events and contest all of our tournaments. We don't know what that'll look like, whether it'll be, like I said earlier, with a full complement of spectators or something that looks modified. But that's our plan right now, and we're gonna try to execute that as well as we can. But you know, this is a fluid situation, and these things can change. And if, as I mentioned earlier, if we see you know, a spike in the death rate, we see a spike in the number of positive cases, and our leadership at the state level decides that we need to dial this back, then we're going to certainly support that.
Okay. Also, will you support will the IHSAA support schools that don't want to play, even if you say at the state level that you can play?
Absolutely. We do that right now. Sans a pandemic, what we do is we offer a tournament series in 22 sports, 10 for boys, 10 for girls, and our 2 co-ed sports. It's in our unified program. But no member school ever has to enter the tournament. And we have schools that don't enter the tournament, particularly our newer member schools, our smaller schools. They're trying to build a varsity program. They may not be ready to get in the tournament. And so they don't even choose to play in a tournament. They may play a JV schedule their first year. We have a lot of schools that do that. And so there's never been a forced entry into our tournaments. That's always a voluntary opportunity that member schools have. And if our member schools now look at this pandemic and say, we're not going to play, then we're going to support that. I fully anticipate that we will have parents of student athletes that say, I'm not going to send my child back to school until there's a vaccine. I'm not going to send my child into the athletic arena until there's a vaccine. I fully anticipate that for at least this first year, some of our elderly fans, grandparents, they're not going to come to games. They're going to stay home because they're in that compromised group of folks that, are a little more susceptible to disease than others. And I think they're going to make a conscientious choice not to go. So that presents a new challenge for us is how do we get our content, our tournament series events, to them via the internet, on our streaming network. If we televise events through our partnership with Fox Sports, how do we get that to everybody? Broadcast network, our 43 stations across the state, and our radio network. How do we get that content out, particularly to those folks that are going to make that choice that I just don't feel good enough to go yet. I don't feel comfortable. I'm a little nervous about that.
So, you kind of touched on, fans and not being in the stadium, maybe a limited amount of a crowd or something. How would that affect the money income to schools if, say, a high grossing, sport with fans like football or, basketball? What if that sport gets canceled?
Well, I can tell you from the association's perspective, I can't speak for every member school because they're all different, but I will tell you globally that if we do not have a fall sports season, it will severely harm athletic programs across the state at the member school level. For the association, we canceled our basketball tournament right before the regional. The regional week is the second most important financial week of the association's year, our fiscal year. Our revenue was down $500,000 from the winter, from the previous year, and we did not contest spring sports. That's another $500,000. So right now the association is operating without $1 million of its expected revenue. Now we're fortunate because of our predecessors that did some really good financial planning and investing. We have that, quote, rainy day fund. Well, if there's ever been a rainy day, we're in it. This is the rainy day that everybody talks about, and we're in it right now. And so the association is solvent. We've done some things financially to ensure that solvency continues through this school year. But if the IHSAA does not have a fall season with fans or a winter season, we will be in dire straits. And we're better off than a lot of associations in our country. If we don't have a fall season across this country, I anticipate that half of the state associations in this country will close their doors. They won't be able to meet payroll. They won't be able to meet their obligations, and they'll be forced to shut down. Well, when that happens, now you don't have high school sports. And that's a sad, but unfortunately a realistic possibility. So we've made some financial moves at the association here. We've received a PPP loan from the Small Business Association as part of the stimulus that will pay our salaries of our employees and our benefits and the utilities to run the building for about 3 months. And that'll get us into the fall. And then we have some investments that we've been able to leverage to provide some funding to keep the building moving, keep the organization moving until probably the end of the school year. But once that money runs out, if there's no income, we're going to be like a lot of groups that will have to shut down. Now, at the school level, it obviously depends upon how financially solvent each of those schools' athletic programs are. Many schools rely on a football season, if they're football playing schools, to carry the freight for a lot of the other sports. Basketball is a huge revenue supplier. For the association, volleyball, soccer, and baseball are all very good revenue producers for the organization. And without those tournaments, it'll become very difficult to continue to provide the same level of service that we do and continue to do business as we know it right now.
Yeah, definitely a harsh reality, but maybe an even worse reality. What if a student athlete happens to test positive for COVID-19 during the season?
Sure.
What would the protocol be for that if there is one in place?
Well, I think that the protocol has already been established. When an individual is tested positively, they've quarantined that individual, and I don't think it would be any different for a student athlete. But then I think the extension of that is then I think that their teammates, their classmates, if they've been in school, I think that the folks that they've come in contact with would become part of what we're now talking about is contact tracing and having those individuals tested as well. And that's part of the apprehension that a lot of people have about recongregating and starting up sports again, because the fact of the matter is we could all be carrying the virus and be asymptomatic and not showing any outward signs of holding the virus, but we could infect somebody that might show the signs and might become sick. And so there's a lot of unknown right now. And I think that people are operating in a very cautious manner and trying to be as careful as they can. But at the same time, I see news reports of, cities around our country that, have these orders in place and people are just outwardly violating and, congregating in streets in major metropolitan areas and on beaches around our country. And if we don't continue to adhere to the advice of our medical community, we run the risk of creating a more dire situation than we're already in. And from my perspective, it's pretty serious as it is right now.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any follow-up questions?
I have nothing else, Katie.
No, I'm good too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you guys, and good luck to you, and stay safe. And I hope that we can round the corner in this challenge and come back to having some high school sports and high school activities and back to some sense of normalcy before the end of the year, and everybody stays healthy.